Okay, any questions or anything you want to talk about before we get into it? Yeah.
This is probably pretty simple for everybody else, but just to put it in context, talk to me about pollen, nectar, to the honey,
Okay.
all of that going on in there.
Okay, so what do the bees do with the pollen? What do they do with the nectar? What's the purpose? So I'll start with the pollen. The bees will go out and intentionally collect pollen. A lot of times when they're pollinating the flowers, it's unintentional. They pick up pollen on the hairs in their body and they move from one flower to the next, and the pollen falls off. So they're transferring it from flower to flower. And that's how they pollinate. But they actually have pollen baskets on their hind legs. And so when they're at a flower collecting pollen on purpose, they're packing it into those pollen baskets. When they fly back into the hive, you'll see, I mean, they're huge compared to the size of the bee. You can spot them, and sometimes you'll see the color, the yellow or whatever. That's what catches your attention before you even realize it's a bee. So they pack the pollen into the pollen baskets, they take it into the hive, and actually have another bee help unload it out of the pollen baskets. And then that bee or other bees will take the little ball of pollen and find a cell to store it in. They mix it with some honey, they pack it into the cells, and that honey that they mix it with actually starts to ferment it. They call it bee bread. So it ferments to a certain extent. That fermentation cracks some of the pollen grains, because I guess otherwise pollen is really hard for even our digestive system to crack that hard shell and get into it, but the fermentation does that. So then after it's bee bred and has got a little fermentation to it, they use the pollen and honey to feed to brood, to feed to the young bees. I can never keep them straight. From pollen they get protein, and from honey they get carbohydrates. And so I don't know a lot about diet or dietitian, but the protein and carbohydrates.
Process do they make that decision? Certain bees that do all the pollen, or is it a timing thing, or is it a quantity thing? What triggers that?
I'm not exactly sure what triggers them to pick pollen or nectar. I've heard it explained like it's kind of, as far as bees, they don't really make decisions, but they have instincts, and I've heard it explained as a triggering effect. If the I guess if the trying to think how to word this. So when foragers come in, they offload whatever it is that they've carried in. They offload it to house bees, and then other house bees will be running around, and they must be able to communicate. We're looking for nectar, we're looking for pollen, and so the foraging bees kind of can make an informed decision. If there's a bunch of bees asking for pollen, they'll go out and forage for pollen. Otherwise, I'm assuming they're foraging for nectar to make honey out of. The other thing is, when a bee stores the pollen, they will tend to store it in the brood nest. Well, what's happening is they wander around the frame and they're walking across brood, and they keep walking, and the brood runs out, and this is a good place for pollen because it's nice and close to the brood nest. If they go so far as to run into honey, they back up a little bit, and that's how you end up seeing that rainbow shaped strip of pollen above the brood nest. It's not a matter of they know we need to make this pattern. It's a matter of this cell is full, this cell is full, oh, this one's empty, and it's right by the brood nest, so we'll put pollen in there. As far as the nectar, so the plants.
Pollen, did they ever have excess? We saw a show one time when it was Gordon Ramsay show. Was traveling all over the world, and they had
Okay.
Spain, was it in Spain? Where they had the acorns, and they had honeybees. I mean, it was really dark, almost like chocolate. On the flavor of those nuts, but they had a tray in the front. It was just full of colored pollen, all this excess pollen.
So there are different ways you can go about trapping pollen. Most of the pollen traps, yeah, you put it on the entrance, and it's something that the bees have to crawl through. And when they're crawling through it, that back leg that has the pollen in it, some of the pollen gets knocked off. I can't remember how it works, but I've even heard of one recently where because of the way the bees go through it, it only pulls the pollen off of one leg. And so they get half of what they brought in. It doesn't rob them. That's if you're trapping pollen, you want to make sure you do it for a short period so that you don't set the hive back because they need it, obviously. The other thing is you want to collect it often because if the bees can't get to it, and in most pollen traps, the bees can't get to it, so then small hive beetle larvae and other things can get to the pollen, and you don't want to leave it out there and not collect it more than, I don't know, 3 to 4 days. You ever collected pollen?
You want to collect it like
Every couple days?
but then you want to leave them so they don't want to take it off too much. So take the pollen trap off for a week or something. And as far as communication too, when they start bringing that pollen in, that's a trigger for the queen to start laying eggs also. Because there's no reason to do it if there's no food for these baby larvae. So once the pollen starts coming in and there's food resources, then the queen will start laying more eggs. And the communication, it isn't like we send you a memo or an email or something like this. It's something that happens inside that hive with all the bees communicating however they do it.
Just like John was saying, whoever's receiving, it's what they take that the other bees don't realize. For example, they may bring in water, and the house bees are taking the water. That triggers all the other bees, hey, don't take this. Or some bees come in and they've got some nectar that's a lower sugar, and they get ignored. So they don't go back to those flowers. They follow up where the higher sugar is.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah, a bee brings in something that the hive doesn't want, and it takes too long to offload it because there are no house bees looking for water or whatever. Then they won't go back and get water again if it takes too long to offload it. And that's another thing that's part of that. As they progress through different ages, they do different jobs. So the foragers go out and get stuff and bring it into the hive, but they very rarely do the foragers go find a place to store it. They give it to another bee that goes and finds a place to store it. So that's, if you think about it, that's kind of an amazing form of communication that they have developed. If you bring something in and the workers in the hive aren't looking for that, then go get something else. It's pretty cool. Anything else? Are we ready to do our Kahoot from last week's? Nectar. Okay, so nectar, the plants actually do produce the nectar to attract the bees. As far as I know, there isn't any other benefit to the plant other than it attracts bees and other insects that are looking for that little bit of sweet that's in the nectar. So the bees collect that. They have what they call a honey crop or honey stomach. When they suck that nectar in, it actually gets some enzymes mixed in from the honey stomach. They go back to the hive, offload it to some other bee, and that bee goes and finds a place in the hive to store it. And they'll start out by, they'll put it in the top of an empty cell, and probably a few different bees can offload into the same spot, and that kind of hangs from the top of the cell. And just hanging there, it's going to start to dehydrate because the nectar, I'm not sure what moisture content nectar is, but it's pretty high. Honey is, once it's capped and it will keep and not ferment, that is 17.5% moisture or below. So they've got to get it all the way from this watery, slightly sweet substance down to this 17% moisture or below. So one of the things they do is let it hang in those cells. The other thing they do is they'll take some of that and they can manipulate their proboscis so that they can let a drip of that nectar hang and fan their wings. And so the air moving across that is going to dry it out quicker. And again, it's got some enzymes mixed from every time that they do that. They're mixing a little more enzyme. And eventually, with enough bees doing that, they get all of that basically dehydrated to the point where it's thick and the sugar is concentrated, and the enzyme has converted some things, and then as far as feeding it, that's their carbohydrate source. So they feed it to the young. That's also what they eat themselves. I'm not sure if you guys know, do adult bees eat pollen, or do they just eat pollen when they're feeding brood? I think they just eat it when they're feeding brood.
There's really no straight pollen in honey. It's kind of an enzyme mixture.
Well, any pollen that inadvertently got into the honey cells probably would be more like bee bread. I'll take that back though, because honey is low enough moisture content that it doesn't ferment. So the pollen in the honey shouldn't ferment. So when they're making bee bread, it must be they're mixing it more with nectar or something that's not all the way to the honey stage, because the bee bread and the honey, that does ferment. Yeah. And it's not like an alcohol smell. Like you can take pollen out, you can eat wax and pollen, and it's more like a bread kind of ferment, in my opinion, or what it reminds me of.
Part of the concept too of eating local honey to work with your local allergies is that there is some of that pollen still in that honey. So it's not like you eat a cup and you're fixed, for example, but just a routine. I'll use my wife. I know there's scientific debate about it, but my wife eats a tablespoon of our honey every day, and she says she can feel the difference. So over a course of now about 5 years.
Cool. All right, we ready for Kahoot?
Ready, Dean?
All right, there's the game pin. Is that playing out there? Can you turn that up a couple clicks? Turn the volume up a couple clicks, because yeah, it should be coming over the speakers. There we go. That's good enough. No, you're fine. You're fine. All right, we got 5 of us. Is that what we're getting? Everybody in? All right, here we go. Okay. Good deal. Everybody got them. Cool. All right, we'll jump on to the next one. Cool. Everybody got that one too.
I thought you'd have a fourth choice, John, the spelling bee.
Cool. I'll have to start making them harder. So this time it's advancing on its own when you all 5 get in. So that's pretty cool. We're buzzing right through it. Good deal. Here we go. All right, so we got one that didn't get it. So we haven't talked a whole lot about that, but not only do the bees go through specialized jobs as they age, but they do have, they're the only ones who have the gland to secrete the royal jelly and wax glands to secrete the wax in the pollen baskets. Dustin's still out on top. Cool. Everybody got that one too. Okay.
I wasn't reading the whole question or the whole answer.
It's the pressure. It's the timing thing that gets me all the time too. So yeah, it's the female worker bees. They're the ones that progress through these different stages. Oh, you really dropped down. Yeah, that's what happens if you accidentally pick the wrong one. Oh, bummer. All right, everybody got that one. Let me know when you're back in. I'll wait for you. Maybe it's waiting for me to hit the next. I hope. I don't see anything up here to admit you, so hopefully it just lets you in when we go to the next question. Okay. So yeah, the drone cells are larger than the worker cells. Did hear something interesting this weekend. Dr. Seeley was talking about bees that uncap brood and then like check on it and recap them. He says they recap it with a different color wax and it's darker. So he says it looks like little targets. So I'd never heard that before. All right, here we go. Good. And there are some pictures that we'll go through at some point that kind of help you identify what's healthy looking larva, what's well fed looking larva, because that takes a while to be able to look at and tell. Okay, we had a little bit of discrepancy. So yeah, most diseases are going to show up in the brood nest first. And that's one of the reasons when you're looking at your bees, it's important to slow down and really look at the brood, because that's a lot of times that's where you'll first spot a problem. Ooh, Dustin's moving up again.
I think I'm completely, because it says I'm in sixth place, so I must have.
Or maybe it added you as a sixth player instead of back on as number 5. Okay, good. Okay, good again. All right. Oh, you can't see that. Dustin got second. All right, who's ML? Oh, all right, good job. Okay.
Y'all vanished up because of bee stings?
Just because we sat so far toward the front.
All right. Does anybody know how to get that to where I can see the rest of my tabs? Here we go. Okay, so how many of you got all the way through the session 3 on the slides? Okay, good. So we'll go through it, and we've got a lot of equipment back in the back, so we will end up getting back there and looking at things, give you a chance to pick some stuff up and actually have them in your hands and see how they work. So beekeeping is one of those hobbies where there's kind of a lot of specialized equipment, and it can get expensive. I had somebody tell me one year though that, you know, if you decided you wanted to take up boating, you're going to spend a lot more money than you would if you're going to do beekeeping. So it's not as expensive as some hobbies. That's very true. So just real quick, so the purpose of some of these, you know, the telescoping cover basically puts a nice top on the hive, keeps the rain out, keeps the snow off. You can get or make or adapt telescoping covers and put some insulation in the top. So now you're maybe keeping some of the cold out and keeping the warm air in by putting some insulation on top. That inner cover does a little bit of that because there's some air trapped between it and the telescoping cover. The other thing is, if you don't put an inner cover on and just put the telescoping cover on, the bees are going to use propolis and stick it down. It's really hard to get off. So when you take the telescoping cover off, you can get a hive tool under the corner of the inner cover and pry it up real easy. At first, like your frames, you know, when we're looking at stuff, you can just grab them with your hands and you can pull them out. I went to help a beginning beekeeper one time, and we're lighting the smoker up at the house, and the beehive is 300 yards away, and we walk to the beehive, and I take the inner cover off, or the telescoping cover and the inner cover, and I say, okay, where's your hive tool? Oh, it's up at the house. I said, I don't know if we can get the frames out. Well, I haven't needed it yet. Well, yeah, you won't until they start putting propolis on it and sticking them together, and then you really do need a hive tool. We got by, but and there aren't a whole lot of alternatives to a hive tool. I mean, maybe a screwdriver, but you can mark up the frames, and hive tool is pretty handy. So anyway, inner cover. We talk a lot about supers and brood boxes, and there's some interchangeability of terms or some confusion of terms, but the brood box are usually the deeper boxes. We usually have 2 of those, and then we start using shallower boxes on top, mainly so it's not so heavy when you're taking off boxes of honey. So supers are usually, I'll call it a medium. I think most people around here will call it a medium or a super. And there are shallower boxes that sometimes people use for comb honey, but for the most part, you're going to use the mediums. Mediums are the 6 5/8. Queen excluder basically is there to keep the queen from going up into the honey supers and laying eggs, so that you don't want brood up in the honey supers. And they can be pretty tricky. We'll get into that a little bit later. I'll just deal with it now, I guess. As new beekeepers, you pretty much have new equipment. You don't have drawn comb. And so let's say you've got your nuke or your package and they filled up the 2 deep boxes below. And so you decide you want to put the honey super on, you need to give them some space. So if you put the queen excluder on and then you put a box on top that's undrawn foundation, the bees tend to ignore it. I don't know, they don't see it as available space. They don't really want to go through that queen excluder. If you had drawn combs, if you put a full box of drawn combs, then it's likely that the bees would work up through it and start working on it. But unused, untouched frames, sometimes they'll ignore. They just don't really see it as room to expand. So what a lot of people will do is put the box, the honey super, on top without the queen excluder, let the bees work in it for a week or so, and then go back and put the queen excluder on. You need to make sure that you know where the queen is at. If you're not sure, you can shake all of the frames until all of the bees are down in the bottom two boxes. Then you put the honey super on, and then you put the queen excluder on, then put the honey super on top of that. At this point, the bees have gone up in there. They've drawn out some of those frames of foundation, and they've stored some nectar in it. Maybe there's some brood up there, but at least there's something that they've done, and they'll tend to go through the queen excluder and continue to work it. If the queen did lay some eggs in there, you can leave them. In 21 days, those are going to have emerged. And once they emerge, the queen can't get back to it to lay. And eventually the bees will just fill those cells back up with honey. And you can extract it. You don't need to worry about it. And if anybody has any questions on any of this as I'm buzzing through, just stop me. Like I said, if you've read it, I don't think it benefits you for me to read it all to you again. So most of you probably have some plans figured out already as far as what you're going to buy. Are you getting some of these starter kits? Are you just buying a hive, or what are you doing?
Starter kit.
A starter kit. And does it have a couple of honey supers and 2 brood boxes? One brood box? Okay, so you'll need a second brood box at some point, and if you're really lucky, you'll need a honey super at some point. Yep. Anybody else? Kit or?
If you're needing an extra brood box with comb and stuff, like the one I had here last week, I got a bunch of.
You've got a bunch of them?
Looking for those.
So drawn comb, you've got drawn comb in boxes that you're,
That one I had here last week.
okay. And did Andy Joseph inspect all of those? Okay, so you were asking over the weekend about used equipment. Used equipment can be risky because there are brood diseases that can be in the comb that if you really know what you're looking for, you can tell, but you're starting out, you wouldn't know what to look for. So I usually tell people to avoid used equipment. If you're saving a whole lot, maybe it's worth the risk. If you're not saving a lot, you're better off just going and buying new equipment. So what Dean's got right now is a bit of an exception. The state apiist, the state bee inspector, has looked at them. He knows what he's looking for. So if Andy says there isn't any American foul brood in there, I mean, it's sure it's possible that he could miss something or be mistaken, but it's pretty safe. So there's some used equipment that I'd feel safe telling you could get. American foul brood in particular is pretty much impossible to get rid of from the equipment. It goes through several different stages. When it's in the bee's gut, it's one stage, and then after it kills off the bees, there's a spore stage, like a mushroom or something. And the spores can get into the wax and the wood and into the corners of the hive. And I think that I've read that they've had bee equipment that hasn't had bees in it for 80 years, and they can scrape and find spores that are still valid of American foul brood. And I think the only reason that it's 80 years is because they don't have any equipment older to check. I think it just survives just almost forever. So that's one that would be, if you get American foul brood in your hives, about the only thing you can do is burn the equipment, kill the bees so that it doesn't get into a bunch of other hives. European foul brood is a different story. That's one that is pretty common, and typically the bees can get over European foul brood on their own, or you might have to give them some antibiotics. So that can be a little bit confusing. American foul brood, really, really bad. European foul brood, not such a big deal. Um, I should have brought a medium to compare. This picture does it a little bit of justice. So if you're at all concerned about weight and lifting heavy boxes full of honey, then I would suggest that you use all mediums. It's a little bit harder to manage. Instead of having 2 boxes of brood, you've got 3 or sometimes even 4 more boxes to move, more frames to move, but it's a lot lighter. I use all mediums in my equipment for that reason, but something to think about. Dean, do you want to grab a couple of frames out of there and bring them up, and even grab a couple out of the hive, the actual hive? Grab a deep. How many of you have started looking at like frames and foundation? Looking through the catalogs a little bit. You've got all of yours, okay. Give you an idea, that's the difference between the deep and the medium. And then there is one that's, again, shallower than this. This just has a cork on it because it's actually made for uncapping. So you wouldn't normally have a screw and a cork on that, but you can pass those around. There is a foundationless one out there too. Mind grabbing that. These two, the only difference is the color, but they're all plastic instead of the foundation that you can pop in and out.
You want a foundationless deep, John?
No, sorry, in the Hive Butler, the one of the foundationless mediums. Yeah, just one's fine. Yeah. So there is, you probably will most commonly find plastic foundation that's got a wax coating, but you can get all wax foundation, and it's a little bit harder to get in the frames. You might be interested in all wax if you don't like plastic. So there's a couple of different ways to attach that to the frame itself, and you can embed wires in it. It can be pretty complicated, and I've never done much more than I've done the plastic frames that are all one piece, and then I've done this foundationless. And the foundationless, this one just has an edge, and the bees will follow that edge. When they get out towards the end of the frame, they tend to curve it towards the center, but for the most part, they will follow that bevel.
Is there a benefit in using that foundation?
They're trade-offs. So one benefit would be if you're concerned about getting chemicals in your beehive, the wax that they use for foundation comes from other beekeepers. Other beekeepers have been using miticides and different antibiotics and things in their hives. It does show up in the wax. In the United States, I guess every time they sample wax, you almost can't find beeswax that doesn't have some of these chemicals built up in it. So somebody who's really, really concerned about, doesn't want to introduce that into their equipment, then foundationless would be the way to go. The disadvantage is, while they'll follow that bevel, they won't follow it exactly. And sometimes they'll still build it across and attach one frame to the other. So you've kind of got to cut those apart to pull the frames out. And it takes a while to get to the point where you can pull them and you've got nice even comb. Something that works well if you've got drawn comb, you can put foundationless in between drawn frames, and then they draw it out pretty well because they have nowhere else to go. If you've got 2 drawn frames and 1 empty one, they really don't have much choice. But starting out, it's kind of tough with all foundationless. So advantages, disadvantage of comb and foundation. Does that answer all the questions? Yeah, okay. So I think probably the easiest is the plastic foundation that's coated with wax, or the all plastic frames. But there are definitely reasons why you might not want to use those and might want to use all wax or foundationless.
Different colors of foundation.
Yeah, so the black, there's different colors of foundation, and the black plastic with wax coating it is a lot easier to see eggs on black foundation than it is on the yellow. And the yellow is actually supposed to be a more natural color, like the white foundation or the white plastic frames. I guess if you're making it out of recycled plastic, you have to bleach it to get it to white. So the yellow is just supposed to be a little more natural, a little more environmentally friendly. We talked a little bit about the 5.4 millimeter, the cell size. At some point, probably right around the time they first started making foundation, someone decided, well, if we make this a little bigger than what the bees are making it naturally, we'll have bigger bees and they can fly further and they can carry more. So for a long, long time, 5.4 millimeter foundation was all you could find. When I started getting into beekeeping, there was a big movement on small cell beekeeping. And you can buy it now. My yellow plastic frames are 4.9 millimeter, which is considered small cell. And I haven't seen any study that really proves it one way or the other. I've seen some poorly designed studies that I don't think prove much of anything. But the claim was, when the big small cell foundation movement was really big, the claim was that you got fewer varroa mites because the small cell bees emerged one day sooner. And we'll get into the varroa mite life cycle later, but shortening that capping by one day definitely can cut back how many adult varroa mites come out of that cell. The studies that I've seen on it is they took some small cell frames and stuck them in regular beehives and let them raise brood in it, and they pulled them out and they counted the mites in them and said there's no fewer mites in those small cell than the big cell. Well, that's kind of like putting a flea collar on one dog and throwing it in a pound with a bunch of dog that has fleas. It's going to get overwhelmed. It's going to have it. So there's still quite a bit of controversy over whether small cell works or whether the bees would actually draw it that size. So since I've done foundationless, I can tell you for sure that if you give them a choice, bees will draw something smaller than 5.4 millimeter. They will also vary that size based on what they need or what they think should be there based on location. So if I put a foundationless frame right in the middle of a brood nest, they'll draw out a bunch of small cell, and out there towards the edge of the frame where a lot of times they store honey, they draw bigger cells and they put honey in it. If I put a foundationless frame up in a honey super, they will draw out really big cells. I mean, even bigger than the drone comb frames that you can buy. Really big, and if you give them the opportunity, they'll draw it out really thick too. So that's one of the disadvantages of foundationless, is you have to look at every frame if you're moving things around. Like when I have a dead out and haven't had bees in this box for a couple of years, I don't know if it was a brood box or a honey box. I've got to look at every frame to see what size the cells are. And sometimes I get ones that they must have been on the edge of the brood nest, and so part of it's small cell and part of it's really, really big. And those I usually put back up in the honey super and get out of the system at some point. So yeah, I kind of like the small cell idea, but I don't really have a lot of evidence that it works. But bees will definitely draw smaller than 5.4 millimeter if you give them the chance. Talked about the queen excluder. Talked about how to use it. I've actually talked to some new beekeepers who had bees swarm when they put a queen excluder and a box of foundation frames on top, and they just never went up, and they ran out of space down below and swarmed. So you'll have to watch for that. Preparing equipment. So are you buying your boxes and your frames assembled, or are you assembling them yourselves? You're assembling yours or have assembled them? Got them built. Good. Good. How about you?
I just have that one that's already built.
Okay. All right. Already built. Have you decided yet what you're using?
I have all the lumber to build my own. Yeah.
Okay. Going to completely build your own.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And then I'm going to do frames without the starter and plastic.
Okay. So like the bevel for them to follow. Okay. How about you guys?
I built them and we bought them both.
Both, okay. Okay. So it sounds like you're all pretty well prepared, because I have seen people get caught when, the bees are coming next week and, we don't have all of these frames put together yet. It can be a little bit overwhelming, a little bit time consuming. But sounds like you're good. So I usually tell people that as far as bee suits or protective equipment, a lot of it depends on your level of comfort. If you're afraid of getting stung or you're not sure how you're going to react to bee stings, I think you probably should get a full bee suit. There are times when maybe you have to move a beehive and they're just grouchy, and you'll be grateful that you've got a full suit. Once you get used to it, you'll probably be a lot more comfortable in just a hat and veil. That's what I use all the time, but I don't react to bee stings hardly at all. Bee suits are hot. I get heat stroke really easy, so I'm way less worried about getting stung than I am about getting too hot. So I rarely wear a bee suit unless it's cool and I have to.
There's also no rule that says you have to have a shirt. You can use your imagination from there.
And there are bee suits that are like 3 layers of mesh. And the idea is that a bee can still sting you through it, but in most cases, the 3 layers of mesh are so thick that the stinger won't reach. If you bend your knee, they'll get through and get you on the knee. And I have worn those in shorts and no t-shirt when it's hot, and I had to wear one because you get a little bit of a breeze moving through and it helps a little bit, but yeah. I like
Are they made of a special fiber?
the special fiber. I'm not sure. They're like kind of a plasticky
Okay.
synthetic, but it's literally, it's like 3 layers of mesh, one on top of the other. And yeah.
There's several examples that
Okay, cool. I like the hat and veil that it's got a string that goes under your arms and keeps it down. Since I'm almost always wearing just a hat and veil, I kind of like that style. But they are a little bit of a pain to get in and out of, and they pull your glasses off all the time. I had a bee get under the hat and veil one time, and I was just finishing up, so I took it off and got in the pickup. So I had my bees out in somebody's pasture at that time, and I got about 5 or 6 miles towards home, and I wondered, why can't I read the stop sign? My glasses had gone with it, and I went back 2 weeks later. Luckily I had another pair of glasses at home. I went back 2 weeks later and I found them, but I had driven over them. I like this style of hive tool. It's Kent Williams. You can get it at Kelly Beekeeping. That hook works really well to get down under the ear of a frame, and then you've got the leverage to pry it up. Once the bees start sticking it down with propolis, the frames can be really hard to get pried up out of there. So I really like that hook. There is one that Dayton sells that's just got a hook on that end. It doesn't have the bent over part. I don't like those as well because you can't tap them into the corner between boxes like you can on that flat spot. That J hook is pretty hard on your palm. So I really like this tool. We got some smokers in the back there. If you get a smoker that doesn't have this wire protecting it, it's pretty dangerous because they get pretty hot. The smoker that I've been leaving at the extension office as a demonstration, that's a real crappy one that someone gave me because it doesn't work worth a darn. So you'll have an example of one not to buy and one that you should buy here tonight. Some people are reluctant to smoke their bees. It's not real natural. They think that like that bee movie is not really good for that. People think that it's bad. Granted, it's not something you would naturally find in a beehive, but if you don't have the smoker available and the hive gets all riled up, they can get good and revved up, and it can take sometimes days for everything to get back to normal. That disruption in brood rearing and bringing in nectar and bringing in pollen, can set them back. So if you're reluctant to use the smoker, I would recommend that you light it and you have it there. And if you don't need it, great. And if you needed it, you can calm them down.
Talk a little bit about what a smoker really does. I've heard about
Sure.
3 or 4 different scenarios on what the smoke actually does to the bee.
Yeah. So what does the smoke actually do to the bee? Most of the communication in the beehive is taking place based on pheromones. Sometimes vibrations play a part, but a lot of it is pheromones. So I think I've mentioned, or you've heard, don't eat bananas before you go out to check your bees, and in particular that artificial banana flavor in candy. So the alarm pheromone that the bees give off smells like artificial banana. I've never been able to smell it, but I've heard other beekeepers say they can smell it when a hive gets riled up. So the smoke is going to interfere with that smell, with that pheromone. And it's kind of equivalent to us trying to have a conversation in a crowded bar where there's a band playing. You can hear me, but it's not great communication. That smoke is like background noise. You'll also hear people say that the smoke makes the bees think that there's a forest fire, and they will go and eat a bunch of honey and then say, or not really eat it, but store it in the honey crop, and then they're lethargic because they're full of honey. I don't know if I buy that. I don't know if they really go and load up on honey that quick, but it definitely has an effect on them. You'll learn sometimes when you're working a beehive, if you look down the seam in between frames and you see all of the bees are got their heads up looking at you, that's one sign that they're starting to pay attention. Maybe one of the next steps might be they get aggressive. If you see all of their heads facing you and you just put a gentle whiff of smoke over the top of those frames, you'll hear a buzz go through them, and they'll go down in and go do something else. It's pretty incredible. But yeah, that's basically what it is it interferes with their ability to communicate. Smoker fuel. So you can buy these pellets at Dadent's, and you can buy a couple other things. I have had terrible luck with the pellets, getting them lit. I don't know. I haven't found a real smoker fuel I'm really happy with. I've used pine needles, which if you got some big pine trees, you just gather them from underneath. Once they're dry, they're free, they're great. They're easy to light, but they burn really hot and really fast. So if you use something like that, you want to I pull up some brome grass or whatever, something that's green, and wrap it up and put it on top so that, put it on top of the smoker so it's like a baffle. It cools it down a little bit, and it keeps any hot cinders from coming out when I'm smoking the bees. So I always put green grass on top of pine needles, and I usually do it with wood chips too. Wood chips tend to burn pretty hot. Burlap, I hate the smell of the smoke, but it lights once you get it lit. It's not too bad. It stays lit really well, and you can put a cork in the smoker, and it'll go out, and you can reuse it next time. You can reuse the same piece of burlap sometimes a dozen times. Yeah.
And be cautious with your burlap. There are some burlaps out there that are treated. That's harmful to the bees.
How do you tell which burlaps are treated and which aren't? Because I've been concerned about that.
The burlaps that I've trusted are the ones that I buy from the bee place.
Is that right?
But yeah.
Okay.
Just, like you could buy rice in a burlap bag, but then it's got printed ink on it, and who knows what else. So I don't run the risk.
Okay. Yeah, I've been concerned about them treated, so maybe I'll start buying my burlap at Dadent's. Yeah. Toilet paper tubes, yeah. Yeah, so it burned fairly hot and quick. Hot and fast?
No, it doesn't burn very quick. I
Okay.
use the pine needles underneath to start it.
Pine needles underneath, okay.
Just kind of crumple it up a little bit tight, and it just smokes for quite a while.
Okay. I
Just
have
them laying around.
I have seen people take their cardboard boxes and cut them the right height and then roll them up, and
I've done that.
yeah, I haven't tried that, but I might
I didn't like that.
rather than recycling it, get some use out of it in the beehives. And this might sound kind of silly, but before you get your bees, practice lighting your smoker, because it can take a while sometimes. The day that you're putting your package in or your nuke, not a real great time to be learning another thing, learning how to light and maintain a smoker. These propane, or actually I think they're butane torches, are that I wouldn't beekeep without them at this point. They're not expensive. Whatever you're burning, you'll light it so much faster with this. And when it goes out and you're in a hurry, man, these are nice. And a fire extinguisher is really a good idea to have. Beeswax is flammable. The wood is flammable. Some of the oxalic acid treatments where you vaporize them can set the hive on fire. So a fire extinguisher is a pretty good idea. Okay, so this is off topic a little bit, but we need to talk about mites, and we'll get into it more later. But this is a pretty good slide for getting you exposed to the life cycle of the varroa mites. The reason, some of the reasons that varroa mites are such a problem is they carry diseases, and when you think about the way they pierce the body of the bee and feed on the bee, it's kind of like a tick on us. So we have some defenses when you ingest something, you know, and digest it. It can kill some of the pathogens, some of the bad things in it. When something goes directly into your bloodstream, it bypasses some of those natural systems, and the bee is no different. So when the varroa mite feeds on a bee, feeds on the fat bodies, it can introduce these viruses right into the body of the bee, and they don't have a chance of fighting it off. So the life cycle here is, you know, the queen lays the eggs. The worker bees often carry varroa mites around with them, and they will attach on the bottom side and feed, but they'll also just basically hitchhike on the bee's back. Anywhere where the bee can't reach it, they'll ride around. And so the nurse bees are going in and out of cells all of the time. And the varroa mite has the ability to sense a cell that has an adult pupa or an adult larva that's about to be capped. And when the situation is right, they'll drop off of the bee and they'll go into that cell right before it's capped. Okay, so the cell gets capped. Ooh, what did I do? There we go. And a few days later, that foundress mite, that female mite, lays her first egg. And that first egg to hatch is always a male, followed by up to 5 more eggs. And that's some of the timing. That foundress mite can lay 1 egg every so often. So the longer the bees are capped, the longer she is in there laying eggs. And remember from a couple classes ago, drones take about 24, 26 days compared to the 21 days that the workers take. So the mites do prefer drone brood, and that's a disadvantage to us because they have a couple more days under the capping to lay a couple more eggs. So to feed its offspring, the mother mite pierces a feeding hole in the bee pupa, and the foundress mite and the new mites are going to feed off of that pupa. So as that bee is developing, it's already got something sucking down its resources and introducing viruses, or potentially introducing viruses. So during the season, the varroa mite population in a hive can double every 4 weeks. Doesn't sound too bad until, you know, you go from 4 to 8 to 16 to 32, and all of a sudden there's a lot of mites in the hive, more than what the hive can deal with. So by the time the bee hatches, it's already severely diseased and weakened because the mites have been feeding on it. They also transmit viruses. So like I said, we'll probably get into mites a little bit more a little later on. Any questions or anything? So I think, Phil, if you want to come up and talk a little bit, I'm going to stop my share.
Ask a teacher if he wants to talk. That's a funny question, John.
All right, so
For the Zoom recording, it's best if you're right up there.
Right up there. There's one in every crowd. Again, my name is Phil Breed, and I'm on the board for the Siouxland Beekeepers. We do meet every month except for November and December. on the fourth Tuesday in Sioux Center at the public library. One of the things that we're working on right now is having a very specified educational list of what we're doing at each meeting. So there's not a walk in and, well, why did I show up and you guys just didn't really do anything for me? We want you to know what's going on. Also, John and I have been talking, and initially we set up that the Sioux City chapter was meeting or scheduled to meet the second Tuesday. And John, as we talked about maybe shifting it to more of a quarterly type of meeting with hey, what are you doing? What do you need to be doing for our next quarter of the year to get you set up? So as we get that going a little farther, we will let you know. Dean, I know, is on the board for what, Dean, 40, 50, 60 years? That about right? Not that much. But so if you want to know about the club, check with Dean, check with John, check with me. Another new thing that we're putting in this year is a mentor program. So we're going to try to find or offer mentors geographically close to you, and then also make it worthwhile for the mentor, the mentee, of saying, hey, here's a little money that so you're able to work together, and then come back and please report, how did it go? What did you learn? What happened? And also trying to find a way to say, it's okay if your mentor didn't get along with you or vice versa. It's not a hard feelings. It's to find the right compatibility, find the right personalities. So if you're not part of that already, it's $20 a year. We just hosted a Zoom that was free to all of our members. The Black Hills Area Bee Club put on one. We paid their fee. For those of us who were there were parts of it that were good, like for the live Zoom. But for those that were in the auditorium, right, it was a tough sound, really tough sound. But we're getting that worked out as well. On June 3rd, we will be having a field day, and that will be in Sioux Center at the Dort Ag Stewardship facility, which is a beautiful facility. The morning is designed to be maybe half-hour long sessions of presentation, and then the afternoon hands-on for what you learned. So for example, if you saw me doing a presentation on how to treat bees with different acids or things for Varroa, here's the lecture. Now we go out in the afternoon and work on a colony, on a live colony. So that's part of the perks. Of course, as you remember, you may get to be in free or a significant discount. So definitely check that out. Do you want me to also talk on observation in hives or records, taking notes, or you want me to do that a little bit later? Okay. One of the things that I hope you do, and that we hope you do as a beginning beekeeper, is get in your colonies. Get in there, check them out, see what's going on. I know sometimes there's some thought of, well, you don't want to disturb them, but as a first-year person, check it out. Check it out. Don't worry too much about anything is my advice. I mean, don't leave them exposed for hours, of course, but get in there and look around. As you get going, you become familiar, you become comfortable. My advice to people is know your why. Why are you going in there? What is it that you need? Is my queen there? Is she viable? Okay. Are there things that I need to look for rather than my queen? You know, as you saw, I think a slide that John had up there that I recently learned is the egg. It's tiny. Day 1, it's upright. Day 2, it's at about close to 45. Day 3, it's flat because it's getting ready to hatch. So as you can see those things, yep, I got a queen. She's fresh. This is a day 2 egg. I'm good. I don't need to go any farther. To help you out, I will be passing around some different hive inspection sheets. Take what you want from them. I know that there are apps out there that you can have on your phone or that you can just take notes. For me, I don't use it. My fingers get sticky. And if it's a situation where I had to put on gloves, my phone doesn't work. So I think Dean is old school like me. This is, show here too. This is my hive inspection tool right here. And inside, this is what goes out to the bee yard with me. Does that make any sense to you? It makes sense to me. So what I've got is I've got my phone. I take a picture of the hive that I'm on. Hey, this is box 7. And then I write down, this is my why. I know exactly what this means and what I'm looking for. Now, if I set that in my truck and come back a month later, it means nothing to me. So that's where you've got to get that discipline of now I've got this, and it's got every one of my colleagues with the notes. From that little stuff to here are my notes. So now that I know, hey, hive number 7 was doing this last time. This is what I saw. Or hive number 7, I treated with this. Because I don't know if you guys, when you get so many colonies, what did I do with that box? I thought I'd remember. I don't have a clue. Okay. So take a look at these. I'll get everybody a copy. Use what you want. You don't have to do everything there. Sometimes the faster you can just jot down whatever note you need and take care of it later, the better. The less disturbed your bees may be for whatever it is that you're working on. Anything else, John, you want me to get after? Okay, excellent. I'll get these passed out. And then if we have any Zoom people that want them, we can find a way to scan it or something.
No one's on Zoom tonight. So
Okay.
So I think what we're going to do now, I'd like you guys to split up. So you couples split up, find somebody else, and I'd like you to discuss where you're going to locate your hives, what kind of hive you're using and why. And then maybe we'll share a little bit. While you're doing that, I'm going to move the microphone back there and then we'll move back there. So you can't talk among couples. You guys all got to split up, find somebody different, have some conversation.
That's what the Iowa honey producers.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. Dean's going to do that. That's fine.
There gets to be confusion a lot of times between the Siouxland beekeepers and the Iowa honey producers. So the Iowa honey producers is a state organization that all the different clubs that are in the state can be part of and stuff. They have a summer field day in the summer usually, and they have an annual meeting. I think it'll be in Ames again this next year in November around Veterans Day, which they bring speakers in. There's a banquet, there's a Queen program, and you get to share information with all kinds of people. So that's part of the new beginning. Beekeepers get a free membership to the Iowa honey producers, get the buzz and stuff like that for a year. And I think that cost has gone up to $30 a year for the printing of the buzz newsletter that comes out and other things. A couple other things to share. The Siouxland Garden Show is coming up the end of March, 1st of April over in South Sioux. So the Siouxland beekeepers will have a booth there, kind of a educational type thing. You guys are sure invited to come and help with that. I don't know anything about bees. I don't have them. Well, just sitting in here for 3-4, sessions, you've probably learned a lot more about bees than a lot of other people already know. But I'm going to try to have an observation hive there so people can look at the bees and different information and stuff like that. I also hope to have what I'm going to call as a hive dive in April sometime out at my place. I live 13 miles north of town. Got hives, there's 6 or 7 right at my house right now that we can go into, dig into, look at the bees before you get yours if you want to come and see how that works. Also do the Plymouth County Fair up in Lamar's, have a big display up there in late July. So you're welcome to come and take part in that too.
Tell them a little bit about Iowa honey producers. You did cover that.
Yeah, I did.
You did, okay.
Will you get us information about that hive dive?
I will try to get something lined up. It's one of those things that I've done before where people come out, I say, bring your suit, bring your smoker. We're going to light smokers. Have you got a smoker? Have you lit it before? Learn how to do that. Open up the top of a hive, see if there's bees in there, see if they're doing anything, see pollen coming in and stuff like that. Go through the frames. Here's the brood. Here's honey that's in there, the pollen, the different aspects. And to me, beehives are just like dogs. Everyone's different. I can't really explain it, but you probably experienced it. You'll have a hot one, you'll have a real gentle one that's going to come and buzz at you as soon as you walk up to it. On the others, could care less if you've taken every frame out of the thing and they aren't going to bother you at all. And it's hard to tell what they're going to be like today or tomorrow. Yeah. Just another learning experience. And to throw in just a little bit, I brought my varroa mite test kit that I use. So when John was showing you pictures of the varroa mite, I'm going to pass this around. This, down in the bottom of this cup is varroa mites. So you hold it up to the light, you can see those little round specks in there. That's what a varroa mite looks like you do an alcohol wash. You aren't gonna see them on a bee. You can look in your beehive, and I don't have any mites because I don't see any. Well, you have to almost kill some bees, wash the mites off of them, and end up with something like that.
Thank you, Dean. Is there a formula, so 10 bees and
Half a cup.
Yep, so you can measure out literally a half a cup of bees. You can even scoop them off with your finger like you would flour or sugar. And that, somebody has done that over and over again, and that's gonna be 300 bees or as close as you can get.
Bees in there, and you fill this up with alcohol and shake it for a couple minutes. And then you can look up in it like this, just like you did that cup, and count how many mites are in there.
Can I ask why is that better than doing the powdered sugar method?
I won't say it's better, but it's probably more accurate.
So,
Because with powdered sugar, you don't always get mites knocked off of everything. Of course, it doesn't kill the bees, they say. Well, I think it probably does.
yeah, some of the information that I've come across says that powdered sugar is not as accurate a way of getting the mites, that you don't get all of the mites. The other thing is that there's a big variation depending on who's doing the powdered sugar shake, that some beekeepers maybe can get almost all or all of the mites off, but most beekeepers, the powdered sugar one, you really have to shake them a long time. And I'm like Dean, I'm hard to believe that you can cover them in powdered sugar and shake them that hard, that long, and they're okay later. So, and then I've seen other studies where they'll do a powdered sugar shake, and then they take those same bees and do an alcohol wash on them. Well, if the powdered sugar got all the mites, there wouldn't be any mites left, right? But there usually is. So the alcohol wash is more accurate. Yeah.
I like alcohol wash too, because it's sad to say, but it kills your bees immediately. And with the powdered sugar,
Yeah.
maybe you kept them alive, but how much you bang them around and maybe mess up their leg and whatever else, and then
Yeah.
possibly kill them anyway.
Yeah.
I like the quick kill.
Yeah.
The beekeepers don't want to kill any bees. They're real careful with their frames and their lids. I don't want to squish a bee. I don't want to do this. Well, with this, if you don't check your bees for mites and find out what it is, pretty soon you won't have any bees in there to check
Yeah.
because we're all got them.
All right. So real quick, split up, talk, like I said, couples don't work. So, and talk about where you're putting your bees, what kind of hive you decided to use, especially if you've decided to use something different. I'm going to move a mic back there and get set up back there.
Should just be in a circle group.
So you guys will have to go over there because they're a couple. They can't talk to each other.
You just said it's-
That's true.
Where your bees?
Well, my acreage is really hilly, and like I live in a bluff, right? Like Jackson. So I have to, I'm trying to find a nice spot that's not down low, and because I have a lot of bottom ground, and so I just built this. My skid loader and tractor, and I think it faces the south, and I think I'm gonna.
You've been doing bees for years.
Yeah.
Full, like sun exposure, I had a lot of trees too, of course.
That was mine that would last too long.
And I think I'm gonna use I think, so don't quote me, but I've been really reading about the lay-ins hives. I don't know if you guys are familiar with those at all, but it's all one
Oh,
level.
yeah, I saw those,
And
yeah.
they have larger frames, and so they're like 17 inches deep, but it's all one.
We've got a neighbor that does that, and he's got really good luck.
And some pictures of this, I was like, oh, there's two of them.
They actually make beds out of them, and like for like spot treatments. They'll make they'll make a room, or they'll make beds, and you can go lay in there, and the heat from the hives and the smells and stuff, it's supposed to be like something.
You're gonna start a spa out in the.
No, I'm not gonna do that, but I thought that was really interesting that, you know.
There was like these things can be beneficial, like they.
I know an old beekeeper, and he said like, If he had like his shoulder ache, he would take a bee to make it stinging, cause it would make
Forget
the.
about your shoulder.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, but with the limit.
Cause it
the
would
limit
help it,
times,
it would help it
no
go
bees
away.
come out the top. They can't get out the top because all of the
That's
frames
bad.
are just laying right next to each other. So they build this bed and they put a cover on it.
If they're inside, I was worried about the weather or anything like that.
Yeah, so that's what. How about you guys?
We kind of just have an open area, but what's all around it is.
We have like a garden area that has trees and grass, and then there's some sporadic trees, and there's a row of lilacs, and then there's like an acre and a half of just overgrowth. It's kind of wasteland. The farmer that farms around us, it was actually his, and we just swapped it. So we had, when it was surveyed stupid. So the backside of the north side of our property, we had 2 acres of farm ground. Well, my family's not gonna bring equipment out to plant 2 acres, 26 miles away from all of our other road. So we swapped that guy, those 2 acres, acre and a half for just acre and a half.
want, I'll bring it.
So that it's just overgrown. There's a tile runoff, so it's kind of a stream, but it's man-made, I guess you'd say. So then we're just gonna mow that all down, plant wildflower and all that stuff, so we're just putting it there. And then we have another like 3/4 of an acre. Alfalfa. Kind of, so that'll be on the east side, on the west, east side, and then the alfalfa will be on the north side. The sun will come up, there's I think 1 tree down there, maybe 2. They're not very tall, so the sun will just all day.
Yeah.
Just right there.
That's one thing I know. Water, I have a large creek.
So we have one on the east side and the west side, they're about a mile away each. And then we have a man-made pond. It's just kind of like a looker pond, we got enough stuff, we might build a liquid fishes every year, but it's probably. Right there. Yeah.
So the fish are the raccoons then?
They don't, the raccoons don't go after our
Yeah,
fish
so far
so
they
much.
haven't they've gotten a chicken or 2. but-
Pooped next to it and drink out of it, I can tell that, but they.
All right, so let's move back here. Dean's gonna.
Yeah, I think it's like 8,000 gallons, 10,000 gallons. So it's-
I've got a camera at this end, but I
Yeah,
want
it
to try
was
and
whoever owned the
talk
property, I
about.
forget who it was, they dug it all.
Get around the outside.
They did all the hard work. Well, until we turned it on, and the pipe in the ground was, the waterfall was going, all of a sudden it stopped, and then it came up out of the ground. This is kind of broken. So yeah, so we had to trench all.
And then they put it on something.
Oh, heck yeah, we're setting you up.
Come up over this way. Because you never get to
Up
the
there.
part.
Some on each side. Pretty good. I'm gonna have Dean talk towards the camera over there.
Is it ready to go?
No, I've got I gotta spotlight it.
I'm not trying to be a movies man.
Watch my shine. I don't know who that would fit. Oh, no, I got something special for you.
It's gonna be our demo.
See if that's what is something you would like to have to use.
Yeah, then you can get a good idea on size and. I have to look at the child,
one?
This one, I was just
That's what I use for starters.
Yeah.
I start with that, handful.
Oh, wow. I do a bunch of.
All right, Dean, I'm ready. Thank you
Okay,
for
to
your
begin
patience.
with, we're gonna try on some
Yeah, that's
different
basically.
Is that for
what we'll
baby
do.
gal?
bee protection suits. Everybody's gonna need this before you get into your hive, just to see what it's like. We talked about ventilated suits, which is one that's really dirty. Why would it get all dirty? You're working with
Rolling
smoke.
around in the dirt trying to get bees off.
The smoke gets to everything.
It's not gonna work like that.
Oh, I didn't know if it's put on yet.
Well, yeah.
Now, go ahead. We wanna see how you're looking at
Anything, for the adult section.
Yeah.
Is it up here? Or?
Well,
This
use
is
your
your
arms, I think.
Oh.
Go through there.
Oh, I
So
didn't
you
know
wear
there
this,
was
you
one
can
on
feel
it.
like a beekeeper, right?
They get that hood on too.
And then those springs,
Yeah.
the springs, a lot of times you can take those and kind of wrap them around you. One each way and tie it in the front.
Thank you.
Oh, there you go. That is really nice.
Look it up.
Perfect size.
There you go. That was my first bee suit and I wore it once, I think.
Really?
Or one time,
That's about it.
so why should I buy one?
That's up to you. But I used it once, hearing all this discussion about having a bee suit, which, yeah, okay, we did a cutout near our house and that's what I had to wear. And then I soon found out that when it gets hot in the summertime, just the jacket, I got the other jacket like that for my son, I think, so he would have something. So then that's what I was wearing all the time. And then it got to be during the summertime, I just wear a hat and a veil for the most part.
Will they still go through your sweatshirt or anything?
Not necessarily, they can.
They do?
They go through my blue jeans.
They go through
My
both.
blue jeans too. Yeah.
But they don't go through mine. It doesn't seem like. Bees will crawl on your legs too, you know, if you're trying to do stuff in the dark. If you get bees down on the grass, they'll crawl up your pant legs and stuff, which is very uncomfortable.
Not mine, 'cause I have
That's
stuff in
nice
my
to know.
boots.
And some people wear rubber boots, you know, in a full suit, duct tape and tape up the ankles and their wrists because they don't want any bees in their suit. And it just depends on your comfort level. Once you get messing with them, you'll figure out if you need the whole thing or if you can get by with just a hat and veil, or some people go without altogether.
My experience for the first year was, I was glad I had the suit because it's the last thing I wanted to worry about. There's so, going into that hive that first time, there's so much going on. I didn't want to worry about getting stung. Maybe in the next year or two, I'll think about not wearing that. Yeah, well, it's just one more thing I didn't have to worry about.
Yeah, the calmer, more comfortable you are here.
Yeah, yeah.
Calmer that is.
Because it is difficult to see through the netting.
Yes, it
It
is.
is. Summer was better.
And some of them have a big round hat that I've seen, you know, the net goes clear around, then you get working with somebody like this, pretty soon your hats are bouncing off each other. So that's not the answer, and then something else isn't quite right. So things you have to adapt to and get things figured out. I use those at my place for people who come and visit, you know, it's something you can throw on quick, it isn't like they're gonna be working a whole lot. The next thing, smokers. You guys got smokers that you use, what do you use it for fuel?
Burlap.
Burlap.
I actually use, dried out corn husks.
Yeah.
Whatever works, this is my smoker. So this is what I use for starter. This is my old smoker that I used to use. I carry my smoker in a metal pail like this in the back of my truck, so it doesn't roll around and drop things. I put a handful of these shavings down in there, get it lit with my torch, and then just kind of fill it up with these wood chunks.
So you smoke meat that.
I told you we saved scrap for a reason.
We have a bunch of scraps. I run them through my bandsaw at work and stuff, you know, 3/4 inch ones. We get about 6 of them lined up, just zip it through. I got a plug for the smoker that I can kind of put the fire out or in between places. Another clue is, what do you call that black stuff that's in there? Creosote gets real sticky. So if you have this all closed up, you're all done, set it to the side. Next week, you want to get into your hive and you get your smoker opened up, this is going to be glued down solid. So I suggest having it cracked open, or I try to make sure the thing's open just a little bit, let it burn out. I set it out outside and let the rest of the fuel burn out because it's real hard to get that creosote opened up. Any questions on that? This was a Baumgart's smoker that I got. It's a little smaller and a little chintzier with the hinge and stuff. And there was one of the seminars a field day we had, a man lake dealer said, I sell man lake equipment, but Data has the best smokers, he said. So I got a bigger one for Christmas 2 years ago. I have tools. Let me suggest that you have 2. 14. If you have 2, you're gonna end up with 1 because one of them decided to go someplace else. This is the one John was saying that he had on the screen, which I got this at the honey producers seminar conference in Des Moines or in Ames a year ago. And Hilco was the company. Yes, I'm on my second one. They were giving these away for free, a new vendor. So if you went and got a hive tool, they just took your name so you could get on their email list. So my wife got one and I got one, and I really liked it. And then it came up missing, so then I went and got hers. And then so I have that, and then I ordered a couple things to have, and I thought I'm gonna get me another one. Because I had 3 of these J-hook ones, and I'm down to 1. So I don't know where they're going.
Hold that still for the camera
These are
once,
the
Dean.
kids, right?
So they sell
I'll bring it.
like those magnets that go on your arm that for like screws and
Yeah.
stuff, or
Oh, I see.
what would you
Yeah,
say?
one of those.
Some people have like a holster type thing, you know, on your belt. Those are sharp, so you gotta kind of be careful. But these boxes, when we get out to the entryway, there's a bunch of frames to go through, which you're gonna see, you're gonna need something pretty substantial. All this black stuff on there, you're talking about propolis, that's what that is, like the bee glue that's in on the frames and stuff.
Let's see how we got.
You do harvest that, don't you? I mean, you personally, not in general. I thought the last time you said that you do that.
I did, I scraped it off a bunch of frames, I haven't done too much this year, well, I got a tub of it that I used. See. And do that, and this.
Stay with you, you're in.
This is a box of tools that I carry around with me in my truck all summer.
Focus on it. It's too close.
John said, a fire extinguisher because of the smokers. Well, I carry a jug of water with me. I carry a towel. A lot of times, if you open up a hive, you can kind of put this over half of it so the bees are kind of covered up, but you can still roll this back and get to working with the bees a little bit. Got some duct tape. A queen marking kit, so I can mark queens this year. If you have new queens, their color would be red. I use this, I can find the queen, get her inside this little cage, slide the plunger up so the queen can't move, and take this marker, put a dot on her back. So that's how they get their colors. And then I got some queen clips like this that you can get your queen and have her set aside, or if you find a swarm and want to keep the queen with you so she doesn't fly out or get lost. Just a bunch of handy little things. We talked about the price of beekeeping. You know, you need your hive boxes, your frames, your suit and stuff. And then pretty soon, well, it's a hive tool, well, 2 hive tools, and then some gloves, and then a queen thing, and then something else, and a different smoker, and it just keeps rolling around. So is it cheap? It can be, and sometimes it can cost you a whole lot more than you're expecting. Got a rod like this that I used to clean out the dead bees in the hive. This will slide right in the front, and I can go in and scrape the bees out.
Throwing that again with the entrance reducer in place there, Dean.
With it in there,
Yeah, if it'll stay.
I can reach clear back in there, pull all the dead bees out, so the bees don't have to carry them all out. Because they'll pile up in the wintertime when they're dead. I have
You have a screen at the bottom of yours?
Now, could you check the dead bees for the mite rather than killing more? If you had a
Well,
bunch,
If the dead bees are already dead, the
the mites
bees aren't
just
gonna
go
be
away?
on.
Okay, I don't know if they would be there for a little bit.
For a
I
little
wanted
bit,
that
but
too.
not for very long.
A bee brush is a nice thing to have too, because you might want to brush bees off of a frame as you're looking or doing something. I carry a little tub like this around with me, because that's all the extra wax comb and stuff that I scrape off the frames. As we go through that other hive, you can kind of see there's always a little bit of stuff that you want to get off the frames. I keep it, and pretty soon you got a whole bunch of wax to melt down with your wax cappings from honey extraction that you can make candles and stuff with. That kind of covers everything. We talked a little bit about queens last week. And it's a little bit more advanced. Want to bring that queen stuff over? Yep.
Gladly.
We talked about making queens, you get the tiny larva out of a frame that the queens laid eggs in. You use a little tool like one of these. If this had larvae and stuff on it, you take a little plunger like this, reach down into the cell, get the larva out, and put it into a queen cup like this. Fill this up with larva. This would go in a frame like this, put it in a hive that doesn't have any queen. And a lot of extra bees in with it, and they'll want to make a queen, so that's how we raise queens or start them. So there's more stuff you can buy.
But that's what hobbies are meant
So
for.
you
right?
raise
So you
bees
get extra
just
money
for
for
your
it.
hive, you raise
And now, if
bees
you guys
to
are
sell,
selling
or-
this, I
Yes.
think it's
Why
a
do you
pyramid
raise
scheme.
queens?
So I have an extra one, so if you need one, if Mike needs one, did you get a queen from me?
What do you-
No, you have honey extracted, but a few people around here always, I don't have a queen in my hive, where do I get a queen? Where would you get a queen?
From you.
Well, you can look in the Queen Journal or send away for one from Georgia or California or something. Or you can get, John raises a few, there's a few people around here that have them for themselves. And it's one more of the things you can learn how to do.
So when you raise queens, you just keep them like for a month? How long can you keep them?
Well, you have to have a place for them. And I learned that.
More money too, right?
Yeah.
That's extra.
Because, can you raise queen? Can you grab the queen? Okay, I did. I got 10 queens on here. But before I do that, I need a whole bunch of bees without a queen. So I can't get them out of 2 hives. I'm gonna need 3 or 4 hives full of bees out of there, put in this, put these larvae in, okay? So I got 10 queens. What do I do with them? Well, then I'm gonna have to have 10 little nuke boxes with bees in them so they can take care of these queens. So, yeah, I can make it, raise a queen.
It's not
Well, then I need
business.
something else, then I need more bees, then I need more boxes, then I need a place to get rid of them. So,
How long does a nuke last? So you have 4 of them. How long would it last before you sell to somebody or introduce it into a new hive?
well, I got 4 of them at home from last summer. So you can keep bees in a nuke. You know, if the queen's gonna lay a whole lot of eggs, you might have to manipulate frames, pull a whole frame of brood out, give her an empty one so that they have a place to go. But you can keep a nuke with queen in a nuke until you need it. You know, next spring, I got 3 nukes there, I can make 3 full hives, which I really don't want. Hopefully, I got one person wanting some bees, so hopefully if these nukes make it clear through the winter, she can have the queen and the 3-4 frames of bees.
Would you keep those inside since they're not a full hive? Would they be more susceptible
I have them in a box like this, only it's divided in the center, so it's called like a resource hive. So there's two nukes in this size of a setup. 4 frames on one side, 4 on the other, stacked 2 deep. So I got 2 of those going. And I made those, you said you made your own hives, boxes and stuff, which I did a lot of that too, which making new boxes, make this, make that. Oh, I get to go buy some more wood, get to try, get some more screws.
Now I get to quit my job because I gotta fill all this up.
I'm looking at it as a retirement plan for next year. And this last year, it's like, I'm not quite as excited about all this stuff as I was before. I don't know how much more of this I want to do. Any other questions?
I've got probably one thing to show you. So
We would definitely like to see the high dive.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would like 99%. So whenever you know more information about that.
One of those things, like,
Like, yeah.
like on a Saturday or something, but by the time, it's gonna be this Saturday. Well, that's the day of rain.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
So for the hive dive that he's talking about doing, I think we'll try and set something up this year. Like 1 week at your hives, 1 week at the hives over at the orchard, maybe 1 week at my hives. Maybe not 3 weeks in a row, we'll spread it out, because if we schedule 3 different things, then hopefully one of them, the weather and things will cooperate and get you into some hives, hopefully before you get your bees, but never know. But yeah, I like the hive dives. That's a good idea. If I can get a few of you to move over this direction, I'm gonna try and talk more at the camera. Maybe I can edit this and post it out. So I passed around this foundationless frame that's got this bevel that bees will follow and draw the wax out. And we talked a little bit about foundationless. One of the added complications when you go foundationless is the bees are gonna hang off of this frame. They call it festooning. They hook their legs together and they start drawing the wax based on the way that they're hanging. It's kind of interesting to watch. When you pull the frame out and it's just been started, there'll be, a half moon piece of wax drawn down. But the thing that you want to think about is if you don't level your hives, those bees are going to hang like this. And that's the way they're going to draw it. So you got 2 frames together. This. And your hives are unlevel. See what's happening? The comb now goes from the top of the frame in my right hand to the bottom of the frame in my left hand. And you can't pull this frame out anymore. So if you're gonna go foundationless, you have to level your hives. You can be a little bit off level front to back, because that doesn't have as much of an effect. I mean, it does have some, but a lot of people like to raise the back up a little bit so that the condensation or any moisture that gets in the hive would run out the front entrance. If it runs down the side and gets to the bottom board, it can run out the front entrance. The other thing I wanted to show is this is called a hive butler. It's got a few different purposes. You could fit frames in it. You could take it out to the bee yard and you could, you could put bees in it, move them somewhere else, put them in a different hive.
Is that something else you can buy?
That's all I'm gonna buy. And as
Where's the money
come?
coming? That's what we need, is the money.
I was pretty excited about this. I haven't even had a chance to use it yet. So the way that this would work, this hole is for a honey gate. And that's, you can open it and close it and honey runs out. So when you got a frame of capped honey, this one's got a screw on it. So you can put a frame of capped honey up like this. You take your knife, cut the cappings off, put it over, you cut the wax cappings off of this side. The wax cappings drop down in here. You would normally not have all of this in the way. The wax cappings drop off into the bottom of this. The bottom has got basically a screen in it.
The wax doesn't go through that, but the honey goes through it. So you can, get all of your frames, get all of your wax cappings in this, and then the honey is gonna drip down into this bottom. And that bottom's got the hole in it with the gate, so you close it so the honey stays in there. And then after there's been enough time for the honey to settle out, you can bottle it out of that, you can put it with your honey, other honey, whatever you want. You can also, after you've uncapped one, you can put it over here and let, some of that honey is gonna drip off of there, and it's a nice convenient place to keep it. If you go up to Dean's and use his extractor, but you take your hive butler with you when you're all done, you put the lid on it and your wax cappings and the honey that's running off is all contained, and you put it in your vehicle and you go home. Otherwise, you have to borrow Dean's and then get it back to him in a couple of days, because somebody else is gonna need to borrow it anytime soon. I don't.
You're the go-to guy.
Dean's the go-to
You
guy.
rent it out so you can buy all this stuff, right?
I don't remember what this cost me. I want to say about $200. That sounds about right.
Yeah.
And the other ones are expensive too. Gee, you had half of them. Yeah, that's the bottom half of it. Different style. But the frames don't fit in that one or hang like they do in this one. So this is pretty nice.
How long do the frames hang in there? Without you come out and then you're ready to put them back? Or would you exchange frames? And
Glad you asked. So once you cut the wax cappings off, if you put the frame back down in like this, when the bees draw the cells out, they don't actually draw them out straight. They draw them up a little bit. So the honey tends to stay in. More technically, the nectar tends to stay in, because honey's pretty thick, but it starts out as nectar, right? And they use these cells. So gravity keeps it down in the bottom of the cell. So you cut the wax cappings off, you put it down in here, it's not gonna drain out of there. Even if you put it upside down, it's not gonna drain out. Some of it will. I mean, it's a little bit messy and it's gonna drip. So this is convenient for catching drips. But to actually get the honey out, you take this frame after you've cut the wax cappings off, you put it in an extractor that spins the thing out. Now, another thing, I'm glad that you asked. Another
You can
thing.
buy one of those.
So you can buy one of these for a lot less than you can buy the extractor. And instead of just cutting the wax cappings off, you can scrape the whole thing off, especially these plastic frames. You can take a hive tool that's clean or some type of kitchen utensil and just scrape all of it off. Let it all go down in here. And over time, the honey's gonna settle out of the wax. You get your honey out of the bottom and reuse the wax. You had to scrape a whole bunch of comb off, but you can give what's left back to the bees and they'll use the honey and rebuild the wax for next year. So it's called crush and strain. You might end up having to take a potato masher or something and cut the wax up so that the honey really does come out of it. But you can do crush and strain instead of going to the expense of buying an extractor. So that's an option. Yeah, cool. Other than that, only thing I really had was this crappy smoker that you don't want to buy. It's got the cage, but how loose that is. So I haven't used it, but they were telling me that more smoke comes out here than does up here. And it's got, that's supposed to, where your fuel goes, and it's supposed to give some insulation around there for the air to blow up through it, but it's too tight. And it sits right down on the bottom. So that's pretty poor design. Avoid that one. Actually, it closed up pretty good that time. I think other than that, unless you had any questions.
Well, we got the dead out there.
That's right, we got the dead out list, so let's go through the dead out.
I do have a video on my phone here of my wife going through everything that John was just talking about with actual honey, if you want to see it. So I can set that up.
oh, when you run it through the extractor,
That's how we do ours. We just
Spring
bring by
back.
walking the super.
She will get gray hair again.
Still.
Right at the-
Yeah, basically like that.
Yeah, they
Five yard
start
buckets
getting
in the swamp.
But you still do this part before they.
Hold it
correct?
this way.
Yeah, just take
Oh,
it
it
back.
comes off.
Yeah.
So I just keep on
I got
putting them back in the super. You know, there's only a place for the extra amount of time.
What do we have left? You can? I don't remember.
Usually what we do is we put the stack of boxes on some extract.
Nope, we do it all by hand. I don't work when it's cold out. In the winter, I got a little cave in my basement.
They keep in the bottom? So once you extract it, you don't put it back on?
Nope,
Actually put them in totes.
That's, you would use the same
one
one.
store, all the coats, I didn't know it was bad. So you don't know about that.
We'll just go on top.
In theory.
And then the bucket's got a spigot. I don't know. I don't drink wine.
To make beer, wine.
Yeah, it's like it's a spigot like it would go into that.
It's like storing it
Gauge,
for-
gauge.
Like in that.
This is a good option to store them in. Law of averages. You don't want to store them in unless they've been frozen for 3 days. Wax off eggs.
I wonder.
Yeah, with no bees, chill wax off.
And Mel had some free.
Yeah, see, that's the honey.
Through a 600 micron filter.
Oh, they
just throw out like.
Yeah.
No, she uses one of her, bought her the heated one and the cold one. And she used them both and said, give them away. And she went and got her again, so she can fillet. I call it fillet, because it looks like she's taking skin
That's
off.
really easy.
Yeah, I can't keep up with them. So I'm like taking those with my extractor. She's like, I'm piling up here. It's like, I can only spin so fast, you know? So yeah, I just say find a good sharp knife.
Yeah.
I'll spend $50 for it. That's my. Just use something. Was that? Or just use these, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's got the
Yeah.
honeycomb design on it.
Oh, did you
so-
say?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's go
We always
check
have
out
a
these.
few that follows this is.
Alright, so at least another $1,200 after $1,200 I've already spent.
Yeah.
So just watch how fast she takes off.
Don't keep track of it.
Oh, that's it already.
And this-
So that's all gas. It's a funny one.
That's it, yeah, we had done that.
See me as like playing fish.
So she's just taking the cap off.
Yep, she takes the cap off and then it goes into something like that. I got a couple pictures on my phone. Your phone was making me have to swipe.
Oh, sure.
So I'll send you a couple.
All right, that'll work.
So they don't go out past frame.
Well, this,
That's
we
interesting.
do a 9 frame in our honey supers so that they do draw out farther than the wood. If you go a 10 frame, and we did that our very first time, and then we use the cap scratcher a lot. I don't know if you experienced that too.
Yeah.
So we, I know some guys run an 8 frame just to make them really draw that wax out. So
So since you're cutting, if they've got the space, they will
Yeah.
draw it out fatter. In the honey seed. In the brood nest, they won't. Brood cells, they will stop there.
yeah, they stop that.
And that's the party, that's the party.
notice the bottom, see here on the bottom here? See this is the new frame. So you can't pull this one frame off without wiggle. So that has to deal with the spacing of the frames, so you want to see the frames are kind of spaced. This one's frozen, so. I put it on my magnet, right? I'll see it again. We did a lot of work. If we were expecting this high, we pull this one out so that. How's that for that whole way down there? I remember that next one off. So what we gotta do there. We have it right. There's my ongoing, how far forward. There's another lever. But it's, I don't know how. I used that wax that I would straighten off and put in my little, that I got. Save that. We got room to work.
So you see the outline was there.
Get used to that.
That's where the weight comes from. Not this house. So you get 10 frames like that, that's what we want to get.
It seems like they have.
Yeah, hopefully not. I don't see any more beats on it. So let's sit down there. Let's put that back in and post this up over here. So some of those have. Okay.
There's not, the only beekeeping is your hive.
I know them, but I lost one roof out of 25 high. And then you see on Facebook, all these other people around Iowa beekeepers and stuff like that on Facebook. I lost all my high. Three are dead. Five are dead. Okay, someone okay. Oyster. Lights. But then, of course, I had exercise procedures as well, so I took a lot of, supposedly that was really cool. I never know why. I've never seen it. What's different about that side of things? This is for the military vets. It's the darkness compared to the whiteness or the. You lose your trees. Early on, but I think police, so I have those.
So you're raising them also because if you lose them, that was a one.
If I only had 2 hives and lost one litter, he said you'd have to watch it more. That's another thing when you're doing an inspection. I won't say you can get a lot out of it, but you can tell that there's something different than what we smell.
It smells different.
Another thing I would scrape all this stuff off was on the inspection. If it's a nice day and you need to call, if they're nasty, and out. It all depends on what you want to do. So there wasn't enough bees to keep the hive warm, we were, it's not as long as the summer.
Yes, I'm bigger than the girl. That hidden area. You almost.
Ooh, that's not good.
Before it's too late.
actually.
Yeah, we'll see you next week. I know, and I put some, I'm not taking it, I got some apples in there for you. I've forgotten that I passed it around.
I have it too.
You don't live in- no, I live up there.
She never sends me anything.
See you later. Thank you.
All right, so my one chart or my beekeeping class all in one chart isn't finished yet. So we'll go through what I have and you can help me figure out what I need to include next or what I need to include in this. So do you remember this from the first class? Is anybody confused or overwhelmed or? There's a lot going on there. Okay, all right. So hopefully by the time you're done with the class, you'll be able to look at this and figure it out. And there's just too much right now, and you're never gonna look at it and understand everything instantly. But you can start to follow along with it or follow the progression.
Have you started to feed your bees liquid?
No, not liquid. It's way too cold right now to feed them liquid. Has to be staying probably above 45 or 50 at night before liquid is real effective. The other thing is like sometimes you'll get a warm spell in January or February, and sometimes, it might be 55 degrees for a week, 2 weeks. And if you fed them sugar syrup at that point, then the bees start acting like there's nectar coming in and they'll start raising brood. And we get a cold snap and they've got all of this brood to keep warm and they can't do it. They'll spread themselves too thin. So now is too soon for sugar syrup, but I have fed dry sugar the last couple of weeks or fondant or sugar cubes, things like that this time of the year. Yeah, that works. All right. So if we back up to this and we just look at frames of bees. So the first thing that this is telling you is that the number of bees in the hive isn't consistent all the way throughout the year. And we've talked about that. It tapers off in the fall. They kind of reach a balance to where they balance out the number of bees and the amount of honey that they've got stored. And then there's some gradual die off all winter long. So something to keep note of is the bees are at their lowest population here in February and March. And that's also when it's the coldest around here. The other thing is, if you're not paying attention here in May, let's say you overwinter your bees in 2 deeps, so you've got 2 10-frame boxes, 20 frames, right? What's going to happen right here when you got 22 frames of bees and there's only 20 frames in that box? That's when you get the swarm. Yep. Let's see. I'm not reading my slides. So there's where you need to get the equipment on ahead of time or you're going to start seeing swarms. And we typically will see swarms, whether it's from people managing bees or wild bees in trees. We typically see them in May around here. Middle of May, end of May, depends on when it warms up.
Try to capture?
Yeah. So I put out some, I call them bait hives or swarm traps. I put out a few of those in a few different places every year. Last year, actually had a swarm move into an empty hive in my backyard. Just wasn't even for that purpose. The year before that, I didn't get any. The year before that, I think I caught a couple. Probably went 3 years without catching any. I caught out at my acreage. I caught a swarm out there 2 years in a row, and then a 3rd year across the highway, since then, nothing. So it's real random. I mean, you might catch some swarms, and it's a great idea to put some old equipment out or
Do you pay
something.
for that?
Yeah, I usually put lemongrass essential oil in there for an attractant. Lemongrass essential oil smells like the Nasanov pheromone. That's what the bees use when they are fanning at the entrance of the hive. Like if the hive moves or if they find a swarm finds a new home, they send out that Nasanov gland or that Nasanov scent that smells like lemongrass oil. You can also, if you're replacing queens, you can take the old queens and put them in alcohol and keep them around. And you can put a few drops of that alcohol in a hive. It's got queen pheromone in it. I haven't done that, but I've heard people doing that to catch swarms. Yep.
So is that, this chart, would that be showing what you want to be adding the super on so it wouldn't swarm? Is that what it is?
Yeah. So, if you're looking at this and figuring out what's this trying to tell me. So at this time of year, it's telling you, April to May, you need to make sure that you're ahead of them space-wise. How many frames of bees are in there? How many of these 20 frames are they using? When you start out with a package or a nuke, you'll just have 10 frames. And when they get to like 8 of those 10 frames are being used, that's about the right time to put the next box on. And so then if you've got 20 frames on and there's 4 frames out of the 20 not being used, 2 in each box, or it's time to put some more boxes on so they don't run out of space. You want to stay ahead of them. So yeah, you can kind of look at this and realize, okay, when April hits, I need to be paying attention to that. And there again, so what should you be doing in June looking at this chart? So it's the same thing. The swarm went out, so we dropped down to, let's say, 18 frames of bees now. But sometime in July, there's going to be over 20 frames again. So again, you need to have some room on there. In this particular case, you also want to put some room on there because you're going to start making honey sometime in June. Another thing you can consider is, maybe in October, maybe you need to take some boxes off. If you didn't get honey, but they were in those boxes, so now you need to go out there and figure out, how do I get them condensed into 20 frames in these 2 boxes down below? You especially don't want unused or undrawn frames in the upper boxes, because in the winter, when it gets cold, the bees tend to move up. So you want them moving up into boxes that are full of honey, if at all possible. So in October, when the population's going down and it's getting colder, you need to do some housekeeping and figure out how to set them up good for winter. So when are the bees at their lowest population? Somewhere in February or March. And what do bees need to stay warm? They need honey. Yep. And each other, right. So what's also getting at its lowest level in March and April? The honey. So if you're looking at the chart, looking at this, you realize I need to be paying attention to how much honey is left. And if it doesn't seem like there's enough, I need to feed them. And again, you can't feed them liquid when it's this cold, but you can feed them dry sugar. Somebody down in Des Moines who sells queens, Ellen Bell, just did a video that, I don't know, just kind of a light bulb went off. I had always tried to make the hard sugar fondant and put it on top of the hive, and like different times of the year add more on there. And she did a video where she just takes the top cover off the hive. She puts 1 sheet of newspaper on top of all the frames and pours a bunch of dry sugar. She had wet it down just a little bit. It looked dry. And then she kind of folds the edges up a little bit. She says that makes it easier to remove later. Maybe folds a little bit of newspaper over the top and puts the lid back on it. So that dry sugar, and the newspaper is just 1 layer, so it's not going to hold it for very long, but the moisture that comes off of the bees will come up into that sugar. So it kind of absorbs some of the moisture, and the bees can start working and eating it. And it literally took her 30 seconds, to put it on, or a minute, since she was explaining it. So I kind of shied away from they call it camp feeding, the dry sugar method, but now I'm thinking, and the moisture is going to come up and kind of make it clump up anyway. I think either Ellen or Aaron Bell. I think it's Ellen Bell. The thing that I passed out earlier on people that are selling nukes, she was one of the flyers that I gave out.
You said moisture was a problem in the hive.
Could be. Yep. Yep.
Can you try to control that or not?
Yeah. So if you put insulation on top of the hive, that can help. If you tip the hive so that when the moisture condenses on the top, it runs to the front instead of dripping right down the middle, that can help. The sugar bricks or sugar fondant or something like that on top of the frames, that works. That'll absorb it. Yeah, so a few different things. I think there's a lot of moisture in our part of the country in the winter, a lot more than what people realize. You get inside and your furnace dries it out, but outside is different. I think there's a lot of moisture around here in the winter. Same thing you would to insulate your house, like the polystyrene foam insulation. Probably not fiberglass because that they'd get into it and it doesn't work when it's wet. But something I came across recently said the blue beadboard insulation. It's kind of like what the coolers are made out of. Yeah, and that is supposed to hold up better than like the pink Owens Corning stuff outside. I had never come across it before, but it might kind of make sense. And it's cheaper too. So let's put it on top. Yeah, so you can put it under the telescoping cover. And I haven't done it that way myself. I don't know, if the telescoping cover only comes down 1.25 inches and you put 1 inch of insulation down there, now you've only got a 1/4 inch telescoping. Or if you put 1.5 inches, you've got none. I don't know how that works. I've built some telescoping covers that I just built in 1.5 inches of insulation. So they've got a big overhang and then part of that's taken up by insulation. I do it all year long. Yeah, since it's built right into the telescoping cover. Because in the summertime, the sun's beating down on the hive. It insulates it from the heat a little bit. Yeah, probably not as much an advantage in the summer, but it does help. Yeah, yep. So here again, if you're paying attention to how much honey, so we've got what, 32 frames of honey, 26 frames of bees. How many frames do we have on the hive? 10 in each box. How many boxes do you need to hold all of those bees? Yeah. So this is not 100% accurate, and some of the frames of bees are going to be covering the honey, but you need to pay attention again when they're putting on the honey. And again, that's not all year long. It's a pretty small window. But when they're putting on honey, you need to pay attention and make sure you got enough space so they've got somewhere to put that honey, or they are going to swarm again. Another thing to think about, what if they hadn't swarmed right here? If they hadn't lost those 6 or 8 frames of bees? Do I have that in here? There. Look at how many more bees we would have had in there if we'd been on the ball and they hadn't swarmed. How much more honey could they have made? So timing is important. And you got 12 months, but you can probably already tell by looking at this, things change fast and you need to be paying attention to what time of year it is, what's going on, what do I need to do to stay ahead of them. So we usually feed in the spring to try and get that population to peak before the nectar flow. So as soon as you can start feeding them, sometimes March, sometimes April, and again, dry sugar or sugar syrup, depending on the temperature. A lot of times people will feed until the fruit trees start blooming in the spring. Wild plums are probably one of the first ones around here, and then apple trees. Choke cherries might be one of the last in the spring bloom. So spring bloom can be a good buildup for them. And a lot of times you can stop feeding sugar syrup at that point. Sometimes, or some beekeepers, if they're still interested, if the bees are still taking the sugar syrup, they'll keep feeding them. I think we've already covered that. Yeah, so there's the starvation danger comes in January through April. Another good habit to get into is all year long, pick up the back of the hive so that you can get a sense for how heavy that hive is. Over time, you'll get an idea of what's a light hive, what's a heavy hive. Then this time of the year, when it's too cold to open up the hive, you can still lift it and tell how much honey is in there. So you can tell if it's light. If it's light, as soon as you get a warm enough day that you can pop the cover up and give them some dry sugar, that's what you're going to want to do. You've got to do it. I'm not good about it. I need to do it all year long, and I don't. So you need to do it all year long before you'll know what's a normal hive feel like. I think that that's a duplicate. Yeah. All right. So this is the whole thing again. I'll have to figure out what to talk about next. Something we just started talking about tonight is the mites and the mite population or the mite load. So the mites reproduce in the brood cells, and the bees don't raise any brood all winter long. So the mite population also declines, and maybe you treated them in the fall and they were already low. But you can see this mite population is in mite population in hundreds. That's just to kind of get it on this chart so that it makes sense. Normally when we check them, we'll check 300 bees and we get a mite count, or we'll convert that into percent. So 300 bees and 3 mites, that's 1%, 1 for every 100. And 1 or 2 mites in 300 bees is pretty common, pretty average, until you get into April. And then as the bees are brooding up, see how the bee population is increasing? Mite population is also increasing, not quite as fast. In this particular instance, I thought, well, they swarmed. Half of the mites maybe went with that swarm, so the mite population didn't increase here. But here again, look at the bee population increasing. Look at the mites going up. I don't know why it keeps doing that. Look what happens right there. In the fall, the bees stop raising as much brood, and the bees are still working and dying off, and the bee population starts to decline. The mite population is still going up. So if the mite population is going up and the bee population is going down, what's that do to your percent of infestation? It goes way, way up. So now all of a sudden, every bee has way more mites to have to deal with, or potentially that could infect it with something. So we will talk about treatment later. It used to be you didn't have to worry too much about treating in the spring, but you needed to, as soon as you got the honey supers off, you would check and you would treat if needed. Now, especially commercial beekeepers are treating 4, 5, 6 times a year. If you can knock them back early in the spring, then they don't steamroll or they don't snowball. If you don't get them in the spring, I think the slide earlier tonight said they can double in population every 4 weeks. And that can really, really, really take off. So these are trying to tell you this time of the year, you could be treating with Apivar or oxalic acid. I guess formic acid is something you can use when the honey supers are on. It's one of the only things you can use when the honey supers are on. And there are more options. These are just some of them that I picked, but thymol is a good one. Oxalic acid vapor is, you see how that's on each end of the calendar? Oxalic acid doesn't penetrate the wax capping, so it doesn't work on the mites that are inside the brood cells. But the bees don't have any brood this time of year. They don't have any capped brood this time of the year. So it's a good time to put oxalic acid on. The mites that are exposed will get exposed to that. There aren't as many hiding in wax cappings. So any questions about the chart or any suggestions about the chart? I don't have that out where you can get to it yet, but hopefully in the next week or two, I'll give you access to
Just
it.
a matter of cost on treating for mites anyway.
A matter of cost.
I mean, just treat for mites. If there's a good chance you're gonna have them, treat for them.
That's definitely one theory. So like a commercial beekeeper who has 1,000 hives doesn't want to treat if he doesn't have to, because it's going to cost a lot. For your 2 or 3 hives, cost is probably not too much of an issue. If you're want to be a more natural beekeeper or don't want to introduce chemicals or something like that into the hive, then you might check and pick a threshold. And if it's over the threshold, you treat. And if it's not, you don't. Cross your fingers. And I treat when I have to. You know, the other thing is if everybody treats all the time, then the mites are going to build up resistant to the treatments. And that has happened once. The very first thing that they started treating mites for, they built up a resistance. It's actually been so long ago now, I guess, that you can use it again, because the mites, we stopped using it and we stopped for so long that now the mites are susceptible to it again. I started out as treatment free because I didn't want to get those things into the beehive, and I wanted to raise queens. I wanted to try and develop some local queens that could survive without mite treatments. I just wasn't having any success. I mean, year after year after year, I was losing them over the winter and losing them over the winter. So I gradually progressed to I test for mites. I do the alcohol wash. And if it's over a certain limit, I treat those hives. If I have a hive that I have to treat, I don't raise queens from that hive. And now I'm even to the point where if I have a hive I have to treat, as soon as I can, I replace that queen with a better queen that I've raised so that I get those genetics all the way out of my system. The other thing is, if I want to raise queens that have bees that can survive without treatments, and I treat everything, how do I find the ones that can survive without treatments? But at the same time, I don't think that I can just not treat all of my hives and let the susceptible ones die. Because the other thing is, there is a lot of truth to the term mite bomb. I don't like that term, but when one hive dies because it's got a high mite load, those mites get dispersed into the other hives. Bees come in and rob the honey, the mites jump on and go with them. So definitely it happens. But yeah, that's what I've started doing. I need to check probably 3 or 4 times a year, but I think checking in the spring in particular is good, because you can really, if you have to treat in the spring, and you can really knock them back, and the whole year starts off a lot better. Yeah. Dean, how often do you check yours and treat yours?
I wanted to do it every month through the summer,
But the plan's every month.
Get 3 honey boxes on there. I don't want to let those off, so I get down to the food thing. 2, 3 times.
2 or 3 times?
And it's good to check them if you need to do the treatment, but then you need to check again to see if the treatment even works.
Yes, that's another thing that's a good idea. Treat them and then check again to see if the treatment worked. What I tell beginners is the best case scenario is you get comfortable with finding the queen. So you can go in the hive, find the queen, put that frame where she's safe, and get your half cup of bees from another frame and do the alcohol wash and do the mite count. If you don't think you can find the queen, or if you're nervous that you might not see her, or even if you just don't want to kill 300 bees to do the mite test, then I think you should assume that you have mites and treat. Best case scenario is you learn how to do the test, and you pick a threshold for a 300 bee wash. Most people will use 6 or 9 mites. If they see 6 mites, they're going to treat. If they see 9 mites, they're going to treat. Measuring cup. So if you want to take a frame that has brood that's about to be capped, because remember, those mites are looking for brood that's about to be capped. So if you take that frame and you knock it into a wash tub like that, all the bees fall into that wash tub. And it's another opportunity for you to look at, see if there's a queen. And then you literally scoop up a half cup. Yep.
When you knock them down, they sit there for a little while, is that how you're able to
Yeah.
They,
Well, they'll be like, "F you guys."
some
The
of
nurse
them,
bees will stay in there.
yeah, some of
because
them
they
will
have
fly
them
up.
all flying around.
Oh,
The older ones that were foragers, they'll fly, so the younger ones won't even know
They-
about
Hit 'em.
flying, you know, so they gotta stay in there.
Yep.
It's too bad you can't just get the drones, since they're worthless anyway.
Yep, yep.
And
And
then when you have them in here, it gives you another chance to look to see if there's a queen moving around in here too.
yep,
And would you just, ones that are left after you dump them back in, or
Yeah.
would they eventually?
You can just take your tub, go like that, they'll all fall down in the corner, scoop your cup out, put them in your test thing, and then take the rest of the bees and dump them back in your hive.
you can also hold a frame up and draw something like that measuring cup down, and the bees will flip into it. I've never been real good at it. And I like the knocking them into the tub because the foragers go back to the hive. You get more nurse bees in your sample, and there's more mites in your nurse bees. You know, if that wasn't the case, like Dean was saying, he doesn't want to check when he's got 3 honey supers on because he's got to get down to the brood nest. Well, if there were the same level of mites on all the bees, you could just pull a frame of honey out and you could test those bees. But they say that it's not as good, that you want to get down to the nurse bees in the brood nest.
Bees in the cup, and put the alcohol in, stir them a little bit or something?
Yeah, yeah. So you put the bees in the cup, put the alcohol in. The alcohol kills the bees, kills the mites, and it washes the mites off of the bees. So yeah, you swirl it around, and I usually swirl it for a minute or
I
so.
do 2 minutes. So
2 minutes?
I fill alcohol, just so it's above that screen, put the bees in there, I put the lid on, I give it a shake like this, that's all it takes to kill all the bees. You know, and then I'll put some more alcohol in about so high. Shake it like that for a couple minutes. Take the basket out, throw the bees away, you know. I try to keep the alcohol, drain it all out that I can. And I've gotten, so I kind of pour this off back into my jar so you can see once again. It's like 9, 10. You know, if there's only 2 or 3, I'm happy. You get 45 in here, oh, there's a problem.
But like how up, so we have 3 today. And they're just gonna reproduce anyways. How long is it before you have more? It seems like you just go treat. But I don't know.
Yeah, well,
Because they can fight off.
if the bees have something that's helping them control the mites, then maybe they won't double in 4 weeks. But it's a trade-off. If you're really, really worried about losing your bees, then maybe you just treat them until you get a little more comfortable. But yeah, I mean, three mites, for instance, 3 mites in August or September, that's great. I wouldn't worry about treating those at all. They've already maintained all through the summer. 3 mites in April, maybe you should treat. I'm starting to see some research that's saying like early in the year, like 2 mites needs to be the threshold. If you got more than 2, you want to treat.
Essential oils to put on the entrance that would be like.
No, I mean, there's some essential oils in some of the Hive Alive is one of them that uses essential oils, but I don't think it's for mites. I think it's more supposed to be benefiting the bees. I use Hive Alive, and I'm not exactly sure how it works. I'm going to play this because this is one of my videos of checking for mites, but it is getting late. If you don't want to stick around and watch this, by all means, you don't have to. This is on my website. If you
Today I'm checking my hives for varroa mites.
my YouTube
And I
channel.
wanted to shoot a quick video to show you how you can do that. I have a few things here that you will need to use to check for mites. First thing is just a regular mason jar. This happens to be a wide mouth, and then I've taken the ring and cut a piece of 1/8" hardware cloth to fit the jar. What you're going to do scoop up a half cup of bees. You're going to put them in the mason jar, put this lid on. The bees won't be able to get out through the hardware cloth. And then you can use rubbing alcohol, or I'm using windshield washer fluid. You pour that on the bees.
I don't recommend
This is
windshield
going to,
washer fluid.
unfortunately, kill
It
the
doesn't
bees,
kill them quick enough.
but you'll stir it around and it'll wash the mites off of the bees.
This was during the pandemic when I couldn't
Then
get
what I've
alcohol.
got is just a white styrofoam bowl. And I'll pour the alcohol into the bowl. The bees will stay up above. The mites will end up in this bowl. And since it's white, it's fairly easy to see the mites up against the white background. In order to get the bees into the jar, this Rubbermaid tub works pretty well. You just take a frame of bees, knock them into the tub. Then you can use this 1/2 inch cup to scoop up a 1/2 inch of bees. Somebody has done this multiple times and counted, and they say that a 1/2 cup of bees is roughly 300 bees. So you have an idea of how many bees you get in each sampling. Something else that's handy if you're going to do several washes in a row, if you have a second jar and a strainer, you can pour the windshield washer fluid through this. The mites won't go through, and you can reuse your washing solution. I already have a frame of bees here. It's important to look for a brood frame, because the varroa mites are mostly concentrated in the brood nest. They're going to be on the nurse bees. They're not going to be so many mites on the field bees. So you can see this is a pretty decent frame of capped brood on this side. If you can, it's nice to find one that's mostly emerging brood. I didn't really find one today. The other side of this frame has some eggs and open brood and some capped brood, so
I
it's a
misspoke
pretty
here. You
decent
want brood that's about to
frame
be sealed, not
for
emerging.
the sampling. And there's more than enough bees on this frame to get my 1/2 cup. You definitely want to make sure you look the frame over thoroughly and make sure that your queen is not on this frame, because the bees that you end up sampling are going to die, and the last thing you want is to kill your queen. What I usually do is take the frame and knock it into this tub. The first thing you'll notice when I do that is quite a few of the bees fly up, and those bees will fly back to the hive. They're field bees, they know where the hive is at, and it's actually an advantage because we don't want so many field bees in our sampling. Again, we want nurse bees. So when I knock the frame and the bees fly up, that's good. They'll fly back to the hive. Their field bees will get them out of our way. Most of what stays in this tub are nurse bees. And then once you get them in the tub, you can shake it around and spread them out, or just let them walk around. It gives you another opportunity to double check and make sure that the queen is not in this frame. So I'm going to go ahead and knock the frame into the tub.
Yeah, they thunked right down in there.
Not a lot of bees flew away, so there's a lot of nurse bees on this frame. I will put these bees back in the hive when I'm done. There's definitely more bees than what I need for my sampling. And now I'm double checking, making sure the queen's not in it. Maybe we'll stir some of them up and let some of those fly back to the hive, because there's more bees in that sampling than what I really need. I'll give them a little time, let them spread out a little bit. Makes it easier for me to double check and make sure the queen is not in there. This measuring cup fits in the corner of the tub fairly well. So it's pretty easy take the tub and knock the bees down into that corner. And then scoop up your half cup, and you can even level it off a little bit. There's no sense in getting more than you have to have. Now I'm going to put them in the jar, put that lid on top. This is just regular windshield washer fluid that you would use in the wintertime, the type that won't freeze. It's not as flammable as rubbing alcohol, so it's a little safer to use. I like to knock the bees to the bottom of the jar. I'd like to kill them as quickly as possible so they don't have to suffer. And then just pour that in. And you start swirling them around. If this was a powdered sugar wash, there's a certain amount of time that you're supposed to do this. For alcohol wash or windshield washer fluid, I think 30 seconds is probably enough. But you just as well make sure that you do it thoroughly. You've killed all of the bees. You just as well make sure that you agitate things enough that the varroa mites are actually coming off of the bees, and you'll get a good sampling. Then the next step is to pour the alcohol and the mites off. And again, the bees will all be held back by this hardware cloth. And to make sure that you really get the mice out, you actually want to shake. And I've heard some people say that they shake for several minutes until they finally get the last of the mites out. Some people will take this sample when they're done and put it in a Ziploc bag and freeze it. And in the wintertime, they'll go back through it, maybe count the bees to see if they got 300, see if there's any mites that they missed. Another thing you can do is spread them out on the hive top, get another good look at them.
It's probably more shaking than what you have to do, but you've killed all the bees. You just want to make
So
sure
you
you
see
got
that
the
there's
mites
some
out of there.
Specks in this bowl. And it's probably going to be hard to see on the camera. These just happen to be some debris, pieces of wax, pieces of
There
dirt,
might be
who
one mite.
knows what. There
I
are
think the
not
rest
any
is just
varroa
debris.
mites in this sampling. Once you've done this once or twice, you'll know when you have a varroa mite. And I'll grab a frame out of another hive and see if I can find one to add to the end of this video.
Fortunately, I didn't. So there's no varroa mites in this video.
The thing that he's using
Again,
to
if you
hold.
want to save your solution, you just need a strainer.
Sorry.
The bracket that he has, is that attached to his hive so he can hold his frame?
Oh yeah, you can buy that. So it right now it's in between two boxes, but normally it would just be on the top box as you're going through it. And those two arms hold the frame. Yeah.
Standard.
Yep. Standard size
You need
frame.
that.
You don't have to have it. You know, every time you inspect a hive, you know, you got to pull that first frame out to give you some room. You got to put it someplace. And a lot of times people will lean it up against the hive. The queen happens to be on that frame and you lean it up against the hive and she ends up in the grass, you know. But you don't have to have it, but I like them. I always forget them though.
And then the bad part is, you put a big heavy box on top like that, and then you got to take it off of there to get it back off. So, yeah, I like them.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
You guys go through a lot of work for this class. A lot of work.
Well, I enjoy doing it, and I think people are learning, so that's, I like it. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yep. That's right. See you in 2 weeks.
So in my house,
Mhm.
when I be wrong, put the hive behind my garage, up next to the garage, 5 foot from my neighbor's fence.
5 foot from the neighbor's fence might be a little
Close.
close, but
Better
how
put-
how
better
high
put-
is the fence? Because,
Oh, it's a chain link fence.
oh, okay. Well, if you put up, I think, a 6 or an 8 foot board fence that the bees couldn't fly through, what will happen is, since they'll fly out of the entrance and they can't fly through it, they'll go up. And so if you got an 8 foot fence, they'll go up 9 foot, and then they'll go wherever they want. So they fly right over 9 foot over your neighbor's property, and you might not even know they're there. Chain link fence.
But there's stuff growing on the fence. There's.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe they would fly up and over it. You could even, put your whatever up this far from the hives, and that would still get them up if they were going that direction. Wouldn't have to be on the neighbor's property line. It could be right up against your hive. Your neighbor won't see the hive, and the bees that go his direction will be 9 foot in the air first. So that's something to think about.
So you're saying if I have it too close, I just go right over their property?
If there's something out there for them to forage, if there's a patch of flowers that direction, they're going to come out and go, they literally make a beeline if they can. But if there's something in their way, they will get up and over it first. So lots of things to think about, isn't there?
So do you move them in the wintertime or no?
Nope, usually not. I mean, sometimes I do. Sometimes after it's gotten cold, I will huddle them up in the wintertime.
In the back of my yard, I have a wall, a 6 foot brick wall.
Okay.
It doesn't get any sun until noon.
Okay.
Good.
So it's blocking the sun on the hive until noon. In the wintertime, it's nice if they can get as much sun as possible. So that might not be a great spot all year long. It's not as important in the summer. They say that, morning sun will get them out and get them working. I don't know if it really does, but in the wintertime, it's definitely nice to have morning sun or as much sun as you can in the winter so that they can take advantage of those sunny days that warms the hive up a bit. Yeah.